Welcome to the Flash Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're working with Events in ActionScript Mouse Events Part 3. This is Part 3 of that series. It's actually the last part in the Mouse Events series. Now let's put together the information that we have learned on the Mouse Events tutorials. Working with the Add Event Listener and the many properties of objects in the new ActionScript 3 environment, we'll build an interactive application. We're going to build this interface on our stage, and it will take many of the areas of ActionScript that we've covered and put them to use in an application. This will be the most complex endeavor that we've tackled thus far, but if you stay with me and follow along, it will help you to understand all the concepts that we've covered thus far in ActionScript 3. And this is what we're going to build. We're actually going to build on our stage, we're going to put 11 buttons, 5 different labels. We're going to use our rocket symbol, a whole lot of ActionScript 3 inside of our Actions panel, and this will give us an opportunity to practice everything that we've learned so far. And I'm actually going to show you a quick demonstration of what we're going to do before we start. We'll build 11 buttons on the stage, and those buttons will interact with our graphic object through ActionScript. In this case, the rocket symbol that we've been using in the past exercises. With those buttons will come the creation of many functions to handle the object properties that we wish to manipulate on that symbol, on that rocket symbol. Everything that we will discuss in this tutorial pertaining to ActionScript 3, we've already discussed in previous tutorials. This will just be practice to put everything that we've learned to use in an application. This will be our first time to truly look at placing objects on the stage with a particular outcome in mind, a functional application. Follow along in this tutorial should allow you to solidify the information we've discussed before we move forward into our next area of the tutorials. Before we get started, I must give credit to Rich Shoup and Zavon Rosser for the concept of this tutorial. While reading through the many books that I researched while learning ActionScript 3, I ran across their book, Learning ActionScript 3. It's an excellent book and well worth reading. The concept for this tutorial was first seen in that book. I have changed many of the lines of code in the layout of the interface and some functionality, but the original concept was theirs. It was such a good concept that I found myself going back to it many times as I tried to design a way to show the many different features for objects and events in ActionScript 3. So I would highly recommend the book for anyone wanting a good written book with many good examples inside of ActionScript 3. So let's move into our development environment and work through the exercises. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation. Let's get into our development environment. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Flash. And the first thing I want to do before we actually start getting into the exercises, I want to show you what we're going to build. So I've already got the finished application on my stage. I'm going to go ahead and test the movie so you can actually see. And we're actually going to put a group of buttons on the stage. We're going to have a scale button that will actually scale our object. We're going to have a fade button that will actually fade it in and out based on our selections on the button. We're going to be able to move it right, left, up, and down. We're going to be able to toggle the visibility of the object using that toggle visibility button, and we'll be able to rotate the object using these rotate keys. So that's what the final outcome is going to be. We're going to go step by step through this, and I hope you enjoy the tutorial. All right, so I'm actually starting out in Flash. We've got our start files loaded. You'll notice I've added 3 lines or 3 layers to our timeline. I've got an interface layer and an actions layer. So you're going to want to go ahead and add an interface layer to your starting file. Then go ahead and add an actions layer to your starting file and go ahead and lock that actions layer. We're going to put everything on the interface layer. Now I've went ahead and created some buttons inside my library. You can use whatever buttons you wish. If you don't have these button symbols that I'm using, you can use whatever graphics you want to use. You may not be aware, but you actually have availability of some buttons in your components panel. Inside this video playback portion of the components panel, you actually have little arrow buttons that you can use on your stage if you want, and you just have to rotate them the way that we're rotating them. Or you can do what I did. You can actually go create some buttons in a graphics program. I actually created mine in Fireworks, and then I just converted them to a symbol like we've done in the past, the same way that we converted that rocket to a symbol. And this way you'll have some components you can work with if you don't have access to the exercise file. If you do have access to the exercise files, you'll have a copy of this finished file in there. You'll have all the components in that library. You can actually use them to create your own. So the first thing we want to do in the first step is let's go ahead and create the interface. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my library panel. I'm going to go ahead and select my little arrow, and I'm going to drag 4 of these onto the stage, or actually 2 of them to start with. So I'm just going to drag 2 of these onto the stage. This is going to be our scale area. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and modify this one. I'm just going to actually do a rotation on it. So I'm going to rotate that bottom one. And actually what we can do, if we select the rotate, we can actually rotate it by 90 degrees. We can actually do that twice to actually rotate it, or we can actually rotate it and scale it by a scale. I'm going to leave it at 100% and just rotate it another 90 degrees and say OK. And that'll actually turn it upside down. Then I'm going to go ahead and select both of those. I'm going to slide them up just slightly. This is going to be the scale portion. Then I'm going to grab my text tool and I'm just going to click on my stage and type scale. Then using my selection tool, I'm just going to go ahead and grab that text and I'm just going to position it on my stage using the arrow tools. We can actually set the size and scaling of this text if we want to in our properties panel. If we want to make it a different font, I'm going to use Arial and I'm going to make these all a 12-point font. And I'm going to keep them black. And then I'm just going to kind of center that between my 2 scale buttons. I'm going to select the first scale button and give it an instance name. I'm going to go ahead and close out that output panel for now. I'm going to give that an instance name of scale up, capitalizing the U for the up, underscore BTN. So that's going to be one of my buttons. And I'm going to select the bottom one. And I'm going to name that one scale down, underscore BTN. And that'll be the scale portion of our stage. Now what I want to do is I want to set a fade portion. So I'm just going to drag around those. I'm going to do a Control-C to copy those. And I'm going to come down, do a Control-V to paste. And then I'm just going to grab that whole area and slide it up underneath my scale area. And then using my arrow keys, I'm just going to position it. And I'm going to go ahead and select the text. I can hit the N key, just delete what's currently there, and I'm going to type fade for that particular text. Now using my selection tool, I'm going to select the up for the fade button, and I want to change its instance name to fade in. So FADE and then capital IN underscore BTN. I'm going to select the bottom one, and that's going to be my fade out underscore BTN. And again, I'm using camel case to name these. Remember, however you name these on your stage is how you're going to have them name or have to refer to them inside of ActionScript. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to open up my library panel again because I actually have a round button in here also. So I'm going to drag that round button onto my stage. This is going to be my movements button. So I'm going to need 4 of these. Again, I'm just going to do Control-C to copy, and then I'm going to paste it 4 times, or 3 times. So I've got 4 of these on my stage now. Now I'm just going to go ahead and position them. Just dragging them on the stage. And there's a way, by the way, we can align these, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. And now I'm just going to actually position these using my arrow keys. Obviously, I have to do some rotating with some of these. In fact, the only one that's right is the right one. I'm going to grab that top one, go under Modify, Transform, Rotate, and Scale. And I actually want to rotate this one minus 90. That should actually point it up. I'm going to grab this one, back under Modify, Rotate and Scale. Control-Alt-S, by the way, is the shortcut for that. I'm going to rotate this one 180. Then I'm going to grab the bottom one, again, Modify, Rotate and Scale, under Transform, Rotate and Scale. And I'm going to rotate this one 90 degrees. So now I've got them all pointed the direction I need. I'm going to go ahead and grab that fade text, Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. I'm just going to drag that in between all my buttons, double click so I can actually get inside there, and then I'm just going to type Move. This will actually be our movement area. Now grabbing my selection tool, I'm just going to go ahead and line up my movement buttons so they look like I need them to look for my interface. That looks pretty good. I'm going to select that top button. I'm going to go into the Properties panel, and I'm going to give that an instance name of Move Up, capital U for Up, underscore BTN. That's going to be our Move Up button. I'm going to grab the one that's pointing right. That's going to be my Move Right, capital R inside there, underscore BTN. Then I'm going to grab the bottom one. I'm going to give that an instance name of Move Down, capital D for the down, using camel case, underscore BTN. And then I'm going to grab the one that's pointing left. That one's going to be move left. Capital L for left, underscore BTN. So we've got all of those names. So now I've got my scale, my fade, and my movement buttons all set up on my stage. I also, just for the sake of giggles, I actually put a smiley face in here. This is going to be my visibility button. I'm just going to go ahead and drag that onto the stage. And again, you can use whatever buttons you wish to use. I'm going to give him an instance name. I'm going to open up the properties panel, viz underscore BTN. That's going to be my visibility button. Then I'm just going to go ahead and grab that move text, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I'm going to drag that underneath my visibility button, and I'm just going to say toggle visibility. And I just, by the way, hit the enter key to get that second line. Works just like a word processor. Then I'm just going to go ahead and center that text on there. I'm going to select the smiley face, open up the property panel, and I've already given him an instance name. Great. Now I want to grab two more buttons. So I'm just going to grab one of these scale buttons up top, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. I'm going to bring this guy down here into this right corner. I want to modify him. So again, I'm going to go to Transform, Scale, and Rotate. I want to rotate him a minus 90 degrees because I want him to rotate facing left. Then I'm going to copy that button, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. I'm going to slide this button right alongside of him. And I'm going to transform that button. So I'm going to go again under Transform, Scale and Rotate. I want him to rotate 180 degrees because I want him facing right. Then I'm going to just go ahead and copy the move text. Control C, Control V to copy. I'm going to put that move text right in between. And I'm just going to name this one Rotate. This is actually going to rotate our rocket once we get him on the stage. Grab my selection tool. I'm going to go ahead and grab all those objects, and then using my arrow key, I'm just going to position them where I need them to position. By the way, if you need to align these better, you can actually use the alignment window. I actually have mine docked on the right-hand side of my screen. If you don't see your alignment window, you can go up under Window and select Alignment, which also has a shortcut of Control K. And I'm just going to do that so I can select both my buttons, click on the left pointing, then hold down your Shift key, click on the right, go into my alignment, and tell these guys to align top. And then I'm just going to position my text using my arrow keys between them. Let's go ahead and select that left facing button. I'm going to go ahead and open up the properties panel. I want to give this a instance name of ROT LEFT, rotate left, capital L. So ROT, capital LEFT, underscore BTN. That's going to be my rotate left button. I'm going to go ahead and grab the one that's facing right, give it an instance name of ROT RIGHT underscore BTN and a capital R, and that's going to be my rotate right button. Go ahead and hit the enter key, close the property panel, and now we've got all the buttons, all the interactive areas on my stage. I need to grab one more thing from the library panel. I'm going to go ahead and grab my rocket. I'm going to drag him to the center of the stage, just kind of place him anywhere there in the center. I want to give him an instance name, so I'm going to make sure he's selected, select my property panel, and let's give him an instance name of rocket underscore MC. And that's going to be my rocket movie clip. And now everything on the stage is named. I'm going to go ahead and select all these, this scale and fade buttons, because I really didn't position those where I wanted them. I kind of want them above my up arrow. So everything looks kind of lined up. Let's go ahead and save all our changes. So now we've actually have the interface itself built. And in the next part of the tutorial, we're going to actually start writing this action script. All right, so we've got this interface built. Let's go up and do a save as. So if in the event you have access to the exercise files, you'll have copies of this as we complete it in stages. I'm going to save this as Flash underscore 1010 underscore 2. I'm going to go ahead and test that movie. And all we have now is we have our interface on the screen inside of our movie panel. Close the properties panel. But nothing's working. So now let's go in and start doing some work with some ActionScript. So if you stayed with me in the first two parts of this tutorial, you saw some of the power of mouse events in ActionScript 3. This tutorial is going to build on that and take what you've already learned, and we're going to actually put it all to use in a very simplistic application. But I mean, you're going to see how we can have all this interactivity now on the stage. So during this tutorial, we'll bring together many of the aspects that we discussed in the previous tutorials on mouse events. This tutorial has many parts. Stay with me and you're going to learn many things about events as we work our way through this. Again, you can get any of these icons from the web. You can actually get them, like I said, in your components panel if you don't have them. Or if you want to just use standard buttons, you can use whatever you want to use to make these symbols, but just get them named, get them labeled on your stage so we can actually start working through the exercise. All right, I'm going to select frame 1 of the actions layer. I'm going to open up my actions panel, F9 in Windows, Option F9 in the Mac. I'm actually going to move this up a little bit and stretch it out so we have a little bit more space because we're going to be doing a lot of coding in this exercise. So the first thing I want to do is at the very top, I'm going to go ahead and enter that stop function, as we always do. And then I want to start building a couple of functions. So I'm going to build a function called move left. And that function is going to be waiting to hear a mouse event. I'm just going to use E this time for my event, for mouse event. I'm going to go ahead and close my parentheses, and I'm not expecting a return, so I'm going to put void for my return, open and close my curly braces. And then what I want to do is I want to target my rocket. So I'm going to say rocket underscore MC dot X. So we're actually working with the X axis is going to be minus equal 5. So that's minus equal 5 pixels. So in other words, it's going to take whatever value's there and subtract 5 from it. That's what that minus is for. Take the existing value and subtract 5 pixels from it. So now let's go down and create another function. And this function is going to be called move right. And again, I forgot my N in function. I wonder why that hadn't turned red. I'm going to go ahead and open my parentheses. Again, I'm going to use E as that variable. Again, mouse event. I'm going to close my parentheses, no return, so I can void that. Open my curly brace, close my curly brace. And this one I want rocket underscore MC. And again, we're referring to the rocket on the stage, dot X. And obviously, if we subtract to go left, this one's going to be plus equal. So I'm going to say plus equal 5. This one's going to add 5 pixels to whatever the existing value is. I'm going to create another function right below that one. This function is going to be called move up. So I've got move up. Again, I'm going to use E for my variable. This is another mouse event. And that mouse event, no data type. So again, I'm going to void the data type because I've got no expected return. And this one's going to be rocket underscore MC dot Y minus equal. Actually, let me put space in there so it's a little bit easier for you to read. Minus equal 5. And that with a semicolon. So now we're looking at the Y-axis, and I'm taking the existing value of Y and subtracting 5 pixels from it. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that function, Control-C on the PC, Command-C on the Mac. I'm going to come down right below the move up function, paste that in. This one's going to be my move down because I'm pretty certain by now you can guess what this is going to be. This is going to be plus equal 5 pixels. Just like we had done with the X, we're doing the same thing with the Y. So here we've defined the starting point of our code. We've broken out the movement functionality of the 4 different directions of movement that will be supported in our movement function. And actually what we're looking at now is let me go ahead and close this for a minute. These movement buttons, these are the ones that we're actually targeting right now. This is going to move that up, down, left, and right. And that's what we're actually targeting. We've declared the functions, we have named the functions. Remember, these will be the same names that we'll use in our listener event that when we assign to the mouse events. So these function names right here, when we actually add those add event listeners to those buttons, those will be the functions that we're going to refer to. Then we've designated whether the movement will be on the X or the Y axis of the movie clip. The minus equal and the plus equal is a movement designator for the present location. So like I said, we're taking the current location and we're either subtracting 5 from it or adding 5 to it, both on the X and the Y axis. Okay, so now all we need to do is let's go ahead and save our work. And now we need to add some event listeners so that they can actually call those functions. All right, so we've built our 4 functions that refer to these move buttons right here. So now let's go ahead and add some event listeners for those buttons. And remember, we named those buttons. We've got move up underscore BTN, move right underscore BTN, move down underscore BTN, and move left underscore BTN. So I'm going to go back into our actions panel. Make sure we select frame one of our actions layer, or else we're not going to see anything. Let's go back into the actions panel. And above my functions, I'm just going to add a few lines. I want to say move up underscore BTN. And actually, let's put a line between our stop and that move up. I want to go ahead and add an event listener. So it's dot add event listener. Now what I'm listening for a mouse event. You should be pretty familiar with this by now. I'm actually going to listen for that click event. I'm going to put my comma, and because this is the move up button, I want to run the move up function. Close the parentheses and end it with a semicolon. So I've taken the move up button now and I've added an event listener to that move up button so that whenever it's clicked, it's going to run this move up function. Let's go ahead and copy this event listener. Control C to copy on the PC, Command C on the Mac, and come down right below where we just put that first one, and let's add another one. But this is going to be for the move left. So I'm going to take out that move up, add move left, and I want to change obviously the function that we're going to run because it's going to be the move left function. So now I actually have an event listener now on my move left that's going to run that move left function. Let's go ahead and copy. I'm going to come down right below the move left function. I'm going to paste that in. This one's going to be my move right. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the left. I'm going to put in right, and I want to run the move right function. And I'm going to paste one more just below that. And this one is going to be my move down. And I want to run the move down function that we created earlier. So now I've got 4 event listeners, and I've got 4 functions that we're using when we run those events. But I still have a problem because, again, as we already know, let's go ahead and save these changes. As we already know, let's go ahead and collapse our ActionScript. Let's test our movie, Control Enter in Windows and Command Return on the Mac. I have no indication, because these are symbols, that this is actually a button. Remember, we talked about that in a very, very early tutorial. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and close this movie and fix this. By the way, these do work. Let's go ahead and test that movie again. Control Enter in Windows, Command Return to Mac. You'll notice now our rocket moves up, it moves right, it moves left, and it moves down. We've got the event listeners, we've got the functions, but I have no indication that's interactive. So let's go ahead and close the movie, go back into our actions. I'm going to select frame one of the actions layer, open up the actions panel, and right under my move up button where I added the event listener, let's add another command for the move up button. I'm going to say move up, and you should remember this from an earlier tutorial, and I'm going to say dot button mode, and that's going to equal true. That's going to make that symbol respond like a button. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Control C in Windows, Command C on the Mac. I'm going to come right down below the left button. I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to change that from move up to move left. Do the same thing with the right. I'm going to add a line, paste it in, and this is going to be my move right button. Is now going to have its button mode, and I'm going to do the same thing with the move down. So I'm going to give the move down button a button mode also. Now would be a great time to pause if you want to go ahead and catch up and type this in. Okay, let's go ahead and save all those changes. So here what we've added our event listeners to the stage for our 4 movement buttons, and then using the instant names of the buttons on the stage, we've assigned an event listener to listen for it. So using those instance names, we've assigned an event listener for each one of those buttons. In this case, the click event and then the name of the function to run. So we've assigned a click event to each one of the buttons, and we've given each button its own function to run when that button is clicked. And then we used the button mode code to make it appear like when we hover over that button, we're going to get that hand symbol letting us know that we can actually interact with that button. So let's go ahead and save all our changes. Let's go ahead and collapse the ActionScript window. Let's go ahead and test our movie. Control Enter in Windows, Command Return to the Mac. And now when I hover over those buttons, you notice I get the symbol that I've got a finger there, that I have interactivity. And when we click on the buttons, we actually get movement of that rocket based on the interaction with that button. So we've made a lot of progress already. We've already gotten the movement aspects of our interface to work. So next, we're going to start working with our scale button. So one thing I normally do when I'm actually building applications is I tend to try to keep my code grouped so that like things are together. So I'm going to go ahead and put a line between here because we actually have the move up button functionality, and then I've got the move right, the move down, and I want to kind of keep things grouped together. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to come down below my move down button, and I want to add scale up underscore BTN. And if you remember, we actually gave one of our symbols on the stage the instance name of scale up. And again, I want to add an event listener to that. So add event listener. And this is going to be a mouse event. But we're going to use a different event this time. We haven't used this one yet, but I want to use the mouse down event. So it's mouse underscore down, all capital letters. And with this one, I'm going to run a function called scale up. And I'm going to end that with a semicolon. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac. And right below it, I'm going to paste another, but this one's going to be scale down underscore BTN because it's basically the same functionality. It's just now it's referencing a different instance name. This is a scale down, and instead of running a scale up function, it's going to run a scale down function. Let's go ahead and save those. I'm going to do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as _3 in our work files if you have access to the exercise files. Now I need to create two more functions. So let's go ahead and pause if you want to go ahead and catch up and type those in. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of our code and add the two functions below here. So I'm going to type my first function is going to be a scale up function. So I'm going to say scale up. Again, I'm going to use E as my designated variable. It's going to be listening for a mouse event. And again, no data type, so I can avoid it. Open and close curly braces. Let's go ahead and scroll this up so it's a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. Open and close my curly braces, and inside the scale up function, I'm actually going to have two different properties I'm going to manipulate. So I want to say rocket underscore MC. Remember, that's the instance name of our rocket. So rocket underscore MC dot scale X, and that's lowercase scale, capital X, and then I'm going to say minus equal 0.1. And I'm going to end that with a semicolon. Then I'm going to come right below that and say rocket underscore MC. So I've got two different commands now in the same function, dot scale Y. And again, lowercase scale, uppercase Y. And that's going to be plus equal 0.1. And I'm sorry, I apologize. That first one on top should be plus also because we're scaling up, we're not scaling down. So that's going to be the plus equal 0.1. Now go ahead and copy that entire function. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac. Come down right below it, paste that in place, and do the scale down. So all you're doing here is changing the name of the function itself, and you're going to change that plus to a minus. So we're going to go get both the pluses and make them minuses. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Good time to pause if you need to go ahead and type that code into your folder or into your exercise file. Let's go ahead and collapse our window, and let's go ahead and test our movie because now we should have some interactivity with our scale button. So Control Enter in Windows, Command Return on the Mac, and now I can actually move my rocket up, I can move it left, I can move it right, I can move it down, and I should actually be able to scale it down and scale it back up based on our settings. So now we've added some functionality to the scaling inside of our interface. Let's go ahead and close the movie. Select frame one of the actions layer, go back into our actions panel. All right, so now let's go ahead and work on our rotate. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll back to the top because again, I like to try to keep my code organized. I'm going to come down below my scale buttons and I'm going to say ROT for rotate left underscore BTN. So now we're actually looking at that rotate button. I want to add an event listener. And that event listener is going to be a mouse event. And that's going to be the click event. You're very familiar with that one. And the function I'm going to run is rotate left. So the function name that we have to create is going to be rotate left. I'm going to come down. Let's go ahead and copy that. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac. Come down a couple lines below the rotate left. Let's paste that in place, and all we need to do now is we need to change the rotate left to rotate right. And obviously our function is going to be rotate right. So we're going to manipulate some rotation properties now inside of our movie clip. So I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to save this as work file 4. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. All right, I'm going to go to the very bottom of my functions, put in a couple lines, and now I actually want to create the rotate left function. So I'm going to type function, and this is going to be my rotate left function. I'm going to open my parentheses. Again, I'm going to use E as my variable. I'm looking for a mouse event. I'm going to go ahead and close my parentheses, data type this as void because we're not going to be getting any returns. And I'm going to say rocket underscore MC dot rotation, all lowercase, and that's going to be minus equal, in other words, just like we did with the scaling, 5. So this time we're looking at degrees, or we're at minus equal 5 degrees. So it's going to minus 5 degrees from whatever the current location is. I'm going to go ahead and copy that function, Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac. Come down a couple lines right below that, and I'm going to change this to rotate right. And if you've been following along, you're probably already ahead of me because you know now that all we need to do is make this. Once we name it rotate right, just change that minus to a plus, and we'll have our rotate right function. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and collapse our actions panel. Let's go ahead and test now our movie. Control and Windows, Command Return in the Mac. So now I can scale up, I can scale down, I can move up, I can move right, I can move left, I can move down, I can rotate left, and I can rotate right. So we're getting there. We almost have this entire interface built already. And again, we've been working with our functions and our event list, all the event listeners that we learned as we were going through those mouse events. All right, so let's go ahead and close our movie. Let's select frame 1 of our actions layer, go back into our actions panel. Now let's work on the fade button. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll back to the top of our code. I'm going to come right down below those rotate buttons, and this time I'm going to say fade in, capital I, underscore BTN. Remember, that's the instance name we gave that fade in button. Again, I want to add an event listener. This event listener is going to be listening for a mouse event. And the event we're going to be listening for with this is the click. And this one is going to run a function called fade in. I'm going to close my parentheses and then that with a semicolon. I'm going to go ahead and copy that line. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac. Come down right below the fade in button. I'm going to paste in that fade in and change the in to an out. And I want the function to be a fade out instead of a fade in. So now I've created 2 more event listeners, one for our fade in underscore BTN, one for our fade out underscore BTN. They're both listening for mouse events and they're both listening for the click event, and they're going to run their own functions, one called fade in, one called fade out. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to go ahead and catch up and type that in. I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom of our functions. I'm going to create a new function. This function is going to be called fade in, capital I. Again, I'm going to use that E as the variable. I'm listening for a mouse event. Close my parentheses. Again, no expected return, so I'm just going to avoid the return. Open and closing curly braces. And all I want to do here is we're going to manipulate the alpha. So I'm going to say rocket underscore MC dot alpha, and that's going to be plus equal 0.1, and that with a semicolon. I'm going to go ahead and copy that function, Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac, come down right below it, paste the new one in place. This is going to be my fade out function. So I'm just going to change the name to fade out. Everything stays the same except the plus now becomes a minus, because now I'm actually going to subtract from the alpha instead of adding to it. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Good time for you to pause if you need to type that in. I'm going to go ahead and add one more as long as we're here before we start testing. I'm going to go back up to my buttons, and right below that fade out button, because we still have one more button we haven't played with, VIS_BTN, that's that visibility button. Let's go ahead and add an event listener to it also. Again, we're listening for a mouse event, and the event we're listening for is the click event. And the function we're going to run is going to be toggle visibility. Close the parentheses and end it with a semicolon. So toggle visibility will be our function. Again, we're listening for a mouse again, and the vis_BTN is that smiley face button I put on the stage. It's actually going to toggle the visibility of our rocket. Good time to pause if you need to catch up and type that in. Now I'm going to scroll to the bottom of my functions. I'm going to put in another function called toggle visibility. Opening my parentheses, E again will be my temporary variable. I'm going to go ahead and put in my mouse event because that's what we're listening for. Again, no return data type. Opening and closing curly braces. I'm going to say rocket_MC dot visible, and that's going to be equal to not rocket_MC dot visible. And this is interesting because we haven't done this one before, but I'm telling it that whatever the current setting is, it's going to be the opposite. That's what that not indicator means. That exclamation point means not. It's kind of like untrue. And you'll see that a lot in programming languages. It's called the not operator. We use it a lot in PHP. We use it a lot in ActionScript also. But in this particular case, what it's doing, it's toggling the visibility. So whatever it currently is, it's going to make it the opposite. So if it's visible, it makes it not visible. If it's not visible, it makes it visible. Kind of an interesting operator. Let's go ahead and save those changes. You'll see that a lot more as we work into our exercises, work through future tutorials. Now there is one other thing we haven't done. Let's go ahead and save all our changes, and let's go ahead and test our movie. So I'm going to go ahead and close those property panels. Let's go ahead and close our ActionScript. Control Enter and Windows Command Return on the Mac to test. So I can scale up, I can scale down, I can fade out, I can fade in, I can move it, I can make it visible or invisible just by clicking on my toggle visibility, and I can rotate it left and I can rotate it right. But there's one thing I haven't done, and I was wondering if you caught it. We have the interaction for our up and down buttons, but we didn't add any of that interaction for our other symbols. So we really still have a little bit more code to enter. Let's go ahead and close our movie because I actually want that interaction. I want that indication that these can be clicked on. And in order to do that, I need to add that button mode to all the buttons inside this movie. And the reason being is because none of these are truly buttons. They're all movie clips or symbols. And in order to get them to appear like a button, as far as that finger indication, we need to actually give them that button mode property. So let's go ahead and close our movie. Let's select frame one of our actions layer. Let's open up our actions panel. Let's go back up, and the first one we need to do, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this button mode that we gave to our move up button, and I'm going to come to our scale button, and right below it I'm going to go ahead and paste that in, and I'm just going to say scale up because I want that scale up button to have that also. And then I'm going to come right below the scale down. I'm going to paste it in again, and I'm going to say scale down. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my rotate left. So I'm just going to paste that in and say rotate left, or ROT left. I'm going to do the same thing. Oops, make sure I follow that case. You have to type these exactly as the instance name appears on the stage. Come down and do the same thing with my rotate right. ROT-RIGHT. And I'm going to do the same thing with my fade in, because again I want all these buttons to have that hand indication that they are interactive. I want to do the same thing with my fade out. So I'm going to give it the button mode also. And last but not least, we want to do the same thing with that visibility button. So right below it, I'm going to type VIS. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. And now we've added the button mode to each one of the symbols on our stage. If I go ahead and collapse my action panels, test my movie, Control on our Windows, Command Return on the Mac, now we'll get that indication above each one of those buttons that they all can be clicked and they all perform a function based on the functions that we wrote inside of our ActionScript. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is a pretty good tutorial. This goes through everything that we've actually looked at since we started our training. We've done a lot of work now with functions. We've done a lot of work with event listeners. You've learned a lot of different event listeners, the mouse down event, ones we hadn't really talked about before. It's similar to a mouse click whenever it detects the mouse going down. But there are some differences, and as we get into some future tutorials, we'll talk more about the differences between the mouse down and the actual click. But there are some differences. We've looked at a lot of different things inside this particular exercise. I hope you enjoyed it. Now let's go back and review everything that we've covered. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save my file. I'm going to do a save as. I want to save this as the finished file. And again, if you have access to the exercise files, if you actually purchase the exercise files, you'll have copies of all these inside that exercise folder. I'm going to go ahead and collapse my ActionScript. Let's go ahead and drop out of Flash. Let's go back into our presentation. And now let's review what we covered in part 3 of the mouse events tutorial. So we discussed the naming structure of buttons and using the _BTN to enable code hitting. And again, I talked about that at the very beginning. I use _MC. I use _BTN. That actually allows code hitting. And you probably noticed those windows popping up as I was typing stuff in. And again, just goes back and reviews what we talked about in an earlier tutorial. We use the text tool to label our buttons on the stage, which is something we hadn't done yet. But I use the text tool quite a bit as we start getting into developing applications. You'll be using a lot of the tools along that left-hand column of my Flash interface. We use the freeform transfer tool to rotate those buttons. I actually showed you how to use the modify window and scale and rotate, so you can actually churn things around and move them around on your stage to make them appear the way you need them to appear. We didn't really convert any graphics to symbols because I actually had those symbols already in my library, but you do know that using that FA tool, you can actually drag a graphic onto your stage, any type of graphic, and convert it into a symbol for Flash so that you can give it an instance name. And if you actually brought in your own graphics to make that interface, you would have had to have done that to actually convert that to a symbol, and we talked about that in the tutorial. We added layers to the timeline. We added both an actions layer and our interface layer that held all the symbols for our stage. We looked at the click event in mouse events. We looked at that X property again of a movie clip. We discussed the Y property of a movie clip. We looked at the minus equal, how we can actually take a current value and subtract either a number of pixels or percentages from it. We looked at the plus equal, which takes that current value and adds either a percentage or pixels to it. Again, we use the button mode property as we had done in an earlier tutorial to actually make our symbols appear as buttons on the stage. It gives them that interaction. When you hover over them, you actually get that hand that you know that there's something there you can do. We use the mouse down event for the first time. The mouse down event is very similar to the click event. There are some differences in how Flash can interact with the mouse down, and as we get into future tutorials, we'll get more into the differences between the click event and the mouse down event. We use the scale X property so we can actually scale our movie clip, both on the X-axis and the Y-axis, and you'll notice we use them in the same function, because if I'm truly scaling it proportionately, I'll want to scale X and Y at the same time. If I only want to stretch it, I'd only scale Y. If I only wanted to expand it, I'd only stretch it, I'd only use X, and expand it, I'd only use Y. We used the rotation property for the first time, and we actually rotated that movie clip. And it's important to understand that that rotation is based on that center point that we assigned when we created the symbol. And in fact, I'll go back and show you that in a minute. And we use the mouse up event inside of ActionScript. We discussed the alpha property, the not operator, which you're going to see a lot of when we start getting into more ActionScript. We use the not operator quite a bit, especially when we start using loops and if statements. We use the visible property of a movie clip. And we looked at how I format my code inside of ActionScript, how I tend to group things together. And the reason I do that, it makes it easier to find things if you're troubleshooting your code or if you want to go through and look. I tend to keep all my stuff in groups. I keep all my buttons together, my movie clips together, my functions together, and it just makes it easier to find stuff. Didn't use a lot of comments in this one. Normally I would have. I actually would have used comments to separate my functions. I mean, as my code becomes hundreds of lines, I'll use comments to tell me in the code what section I'm in. And we'll get into that as we get into some future tutorials. So in the next tutorial, we're going to move past mouse events, because we've actually done 3 tutorials on mouse events. I think that's enough. I think we've covered about everything you need to know for now. And we're going to get into timer events in ActionScript 3. And there's a lot that we can do with timer events, because then they're triggered on their own. Again, if you have any comments or suggestions on the tutorials, please let me know. There's an email link right above this video on the website. And I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. One thing I do want to point out, and I really should have pointed it out in the tutorial, I'm kind of glad I caught it, and that's one of the reasons why I do that review, is the registration point. That small dot that you see in the center of the rocket with that plus sign, that's the registration point, and that's what things are going to rotate on. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and create just a small square on our stage. I'm just going to give this a fill color of, we'll give it a little fill color yellow. I'm just going to create a small square. I'm going to grab my selection tool, and I want to go ahead and convert this to a symbol. So again, I'm going to use that F8 shortcut key. This is the registration point, and we can put this in any one of 9 spots just by clicking in one of these little boxes. And I normally keep it in the center, because normally when I'm rotating things, I want them to rotate on their center, but you don't have to. Let's put this in the upper left-hand corner, just for an example, and let's name this, I'm just going to have this as a movie clip, and I'm going to call it box. Click OK, and that's going to convert that to a symbol. Now you'll notice that I've got that little square in the upper right or upper left-hand corner. Here it's in the center. There it's in the upper left-hand corner. If I go into ActionScript, let's go ahead and give this an instance name, and I'm just going to call it box underscore MC, because it's going to be a movie clip. And I'm going to go ahead and tell this, I'm going to go ahead and select my actions layer. I'm not going to save these changes, by the way, so they're not going to be in your finished file. I just want to say up here, box underscore MC dot rotate equal, let's just give it 25 degrees. And I believe that's how we actually scale the rotation. Actually, I need to say rotation. So rotation, 25. And I'm going to save that change. When I go out here and test this, it's going to rotate off that point. So when I test the movie, Control Enter Windows, Command Return in the Mac, up, box underscore MX. I didn't name it right. Let's go back to my actions panel. It's box underscore MC, not MX. Let's go ahead and save that change. Collapse my window. Let's collapse the compiler error. Test the movie, Control Enter Windows, Command Return in the Mac. And you'll notice now it rotated from that point, because that's the reference point. That's where we actually put the reference point when we created the symbol. Here you'll notice my little plus sign is in the center. Here that plus sign is on that upper left-hand corner. And it's all based on how we set up the symbol when we convert it to a symbol in that conversion, that F8 conversion box, just depending upon where we select. So if I were to select my movie clip, let's cancel this and call up that F8. You'll notice now I can actually change his reference point if I wanted to. I'm not going to, but we could. But that's how it rotates. It rotates from that reference point. And there may be times when you're doing things when you'll want boxes to rotate from the corners and not from the center. Or maybe from an edge and not from the center. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. I'm going to go ahead and delete this from our stage. Let's go ahead and delete that from our actions panel. Select frame 1. Let's get that out of there. I didn't make that clear in the tutorial, and I wanted you to understand that, because that's where it's actually getting the reference for the rotation, is off the point that we assigned it when we converted it into a movie clip.